The garden, it works on its own time. It's slow, it gives you bits and pieces, drips and drops, and then it gives you a whole bunch all at once. It's taken me a while to figure out how do I manage food coming in like this, because it's nothing like what it is when you go to the grocery store. I live in New York State, and I'm so lucky to be able to go to the grocery store and get pretty much whatever I want, whenever I want, just as much as I want. And the garden doesn't work like that. And the garden doesn't get on your pace. You get on the garden's pace. And this video is just meant for a person who's new to growing plants and maybe needs a few ways to manage what comes in. I'm a big fan of learning the easiest way to do something first, and then each time I revisit it, trying to improve a little bit. Let's talk about how to use up the harvest, and we can begin with the easiest way, eating things fresh. It's been about 10 years since I've been planting fruits and vegetables, and over that time, I started to see what I like to have a lot of and what I don't need so much of. I began to see a pattern of the things that I liked and the things that I didn't like. And each year I have a good idea of what I will keep regrowing and what things I probably won't grow again. That information can be really helpful because I know there's certain things I will grow again. And what I do is I collect recipes to use up those ingredients. One year, I had a ton of raspberries, and it was more than any of us could just eat fresh. And so I had to figure out how can I use up these raspberries. I found my favorite raspberry bar recipe that year, and I know that each year I have a recipe on hand that will use up a bunch of raspberries, which takes off the stress of the abundance when it all comes in. Same thing with tomatoes. You can get so many tomatoes in one year, so it's helpful to have a recipe on hand of what you can do, maybe a bruschetta, maybe a sauce, maybe trying to make your own ketchup. There's lots of different things that you could try, and I have those in my cookbook. That way I know on a pinch what I can do with all the extra tomatoes. The next easiest thing is freezing the harvest. Certain things you could literally just put into the freezer, like raspberries. Maybe you want them for smoothies later on, or you can put tomatoes directly into the freezer and you can use them to make a tomato sauce in the wintertime. There's other things that you could put in the freezer that take a little bit more preparation. Some of the things that might take a little bit more time involve blanching. Blanching is when you take fresh produce and put it into a pot of boiling water for about 30 seconds and then into an ice bath. I blanch the beans that I freeze. I also blanch the kale that I freeze. Over the years, there's been occasions where I've put beans directly into the freezer and the kale directly into the freezer as well without blanching them at all. But I have found that if I have the time, it really does come out better with blanching. They say that blanching beans kills an enzyme that makes them mushy when you reheat them later on. And also, if you blanch kale, it wilts it down, which means you don't need as much storage space in your freezer to freeze a bunch of kale once it's been blanched. Something else I learned is to do my future self a favor and cut the vegetable into whatever size and shape I will be using it for later on. So the beans I make into half-inch pieces, and I chop up the kale before I blanch it. Another simple way to preserve is by drying. There's all sorts of fancy ways that you could dry something, like in a dehydrator or even a freeze dryer, but I'm talking about the really simple way where you just take a bunch of something and you hang it up and leave it there for a month or two. I have found this extremely easy and very successful for most herbs. So my favorite one to do that with is dill and mint. Both of those herbs grow really well here. They produce a whole bunch, and I use them during the year, so they're also really helpful. I've seen people do it with peppers and some other foods as well. I haven't personally done it, but it seems like it's pretty simple when they do it. Another way that I like to preserve the harvest is by refrigerator pickling something. This method is great for somebody who might be a little bit skittish about canning stuff. That would be me. For a bunch of years, the thought of canning something and putting it on the shelf was just more than I could handle. So, what I wound up doing was a lot of refrigerator pickling. I love doing this with cucumbers, with peppers. I even do it with beans and some nasturtium pods, all different things like that. It's very simple and it's very beginner friendly, and you can have something delicious and unique in just a few days. The process itself usually just involves boiling some vinegar and different spices and then pouring it over whatever food you intend to pickle. And they're really delicious. So I highly recommend that if you're not ready to plunge into canning yet. So the next one is water bath canning. Oh boy, this one I do sparingly because I'm still kind of a wimpy baby about it. When I was first attempting to do this, I would follow a canning recipe, get to the end, not be 100% sure that I did it correctly, kind of freak out a little bit, get concerned, and just put it in the fridge and not actually put it on the shelf, even though I had fully canned it. My ever patient husband said, I love that you're trying to learn something new, but we don't have the refrigerator space for you to keep canning all these things and then putting them in the refrigerator. So it seems like you're going to have to just try it out on the shelf. And so I did it. I put my first recipe on the shelf and then I tried it a few months later. I took a little tiny bite just to make sure everything was okay. It tasted great. Now I know that recipe is okay. And then each year I add another recipe. So I'm building up the confidence for myself to try to water bath can and put things on the shelf. I've talked to people who have been canning for their whole life, maybe multiple generations. It seems like I'm being excessively cautious, but I needed to do it this way to feel comfortable. But that is another fantastic way of preserving the harvest. The reason I think that it's so helpful is because you don't have to worry about storage space in the freezer like you would do if you were freezing something. You can have them out of season the way that you couldn't have it if you were just eating them fresh. And even though refrigerator pickles and refrigerator brines can last a really long time, this lasts a lot longer. So if you're feeling adventurous, you should try that one too. There's two other preserving methods that I know really nothing about. One is pressure canning. Never done that. Maybe someday. And the other one is freeze drying. Again, I've never done that, and maybe someday. There was one last thing that I experienced that you may or may not experience as well. There's a certain amount of guilt that I had when things would go bad. I don't want to be wasteful. It makes complete sense that I would feel guilty or frustrated when I didn't get to it, I didn't pick it in time, or I didn't preserve it in time. But remember, if you're growing something, you could always compost it, right? Just because you grow something doesn't mean that you have to actually eat it. You could put it in the compost pile and allow that material to not be used as sustenance now, but to be used to make soil for the sustenance next year. So if you find yourself overwhelmed by the harvest and you won't get to it all, that's okay. Take a deep breath and just get a little bit better each year. And if you're able to do that, that sounds like a success. I hope your gardening year is going or has gone really well. And as your garden is growing, you have the chance to grow too.